guys! So let's do one of our final lecture videos in this series, and let's talk about multiplying and dividing fractions. So, usually when it comes to fractions, people hate adding and subtracting because of that whole least common denominator nonsense. Don't you like my eraser here? But people usually like multiplying and dividing because they think it's a little bit easier to handle. So this video probably won't take us as long as the adding did. Okay, so when we multiply fractions, again, we're going to start with our steps. So our first step is you're going to multiply. I'm going to just abbreviate that, but that means multiply. So multiply your numerators straight across. Multiply your denominators straight across. And of course, what's our final step? Reduce if you can. You always want to put this in simplest forms. Now, a lot of the times, hopefully you've already watched the improper to mixed fraction video, because especially when you multiply and divide, you're going to run into this. So if you haven't watched that video yet, you might get a little lost. So I'd pause and go to that video if you haven't watched it yet. Okay, so that's multiplying fractions. Those are your steps. That's it. So as far as dividing fractions, our first step, and here's where the little catch comes in, and this is the only time you're going to do this ever in math, is you are going to flip. Well, I shouldn't say ever in math. Don't quote me on that, because you'll eventually get to a point with negative exponents, and then you'll have to flip. But here, you're going to flip your second fraction. That's going to be the first thing you're going to do. If you're using a book, or if you've looked in a book, it's called inverting the fraction, but why use the fancy words? Sometimes they're scarier than they need to be. So it's really just flipping the fraction. When you do that, the sign changes, and this is a big deal. The sign changes to multiplication. Now, a lot of people ask, why do you flip the second fraction? Why can't you flip the first one? And my big, great teacher answer is, I have no idea. That's what the Greeks decided, that it's always going to be the second one. So it's always going to be the second fraction that shows up, whether it's the one to the right or the one on the bottom, depending on whether you're writing these across or you're writing these up and down. The only ones we really had to write up and down was addition and subtraction. So as soon as you flip that second fraction and it changes the sign to multiplication, now it becomes a multiplication problem. And you follow the same steps. And of course, to multiply fractions, you would then follow these 3 steps. So those are your steps. If you still need to write them down, hit pause, because I'm about to erase the board, because then we're going to do some multiplication problems first, then we'll do division problems. Okay, so again, if you have not watched the improper to proper fractions video, you need to watch that before we get into this, because you're going to be playing with those kinds of problems. So, let's start easy, and then we'll build up. So let's do 1/2 times 1/4. Now for multiplication problems, if you forget what to do, here's a little trick that might help. Put a little multiply sign up at the top and a little multiply sign down the bottom. And now it shows you what you have to do. Because remember, our step is to multiply across the top multiply across the bottom. So, 1 times 1, I really hope you just said 1. 2 times 4 is 8. And then our final step is, can we reduce that anymore? Nope. So we're done. This is our answer. That's multiplying a fraction. That's it. Told you, it's a lot nicer than adding and subtracting. Okay, so, 6/7 times 1/2. And again, if you forget what your step is, draw your smaller multiplication signs between your numerators and your denominators, and then it immediately shows you what your steps are. So 6 times 1 is 6. 7 times 2 is 14. Are we finished? I hope you're saying no. Because this can be reduced. Remember, we always have to reduce. So this is still a proper fraction because the numerator is smaller than the denominator. So we're going to divide by a multiple of 2. 6 divided by 2 is 3. 14 divided by 2 is 7. That cannot go any lower, so that is our answer. And this is pretty much the entire rhythm of multiplying fractions. But I want to show you one that is going to include multiplying with mixed fractions. So usually if a problem is going to start with a mixed fraction, it's going to end as a mixed fraction. But we're going to take this middle step of changing those mixed fractions to improper fractions first. So this way we don't accidentally miss a number. Okay, so let's do 2.5 times 1 1/4. Now, there are some teachers who would say you can multiply the 2 and the 1 separately, and then you can multiply this fraction and this fraction separately. We're not going to do that, because here's the problem. Let's say, hypothetically, you multiply these together, fine. Then you multiply these together, but if you just multiplied those together, you end up with an improper fraction. That's not the answer, but let's just say that you do. Well, now that means you have to turn this into a mixed fraction, and you have to remember to take this whole number and add it back into whatever you multiplied with your whole numbers. It's a lot of steps, it's a lot of things to remember, and it's a big cavity. It's a big risk to get it wrong. So we're going to do something different instead. I'm not saying that this method is wrong at all, and if you were taught that way and you're comfortable that way, more power to you. Use what you're comfortable with. You could just potentially run into more problems that way. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to change both of these to improper fractions, then do our multiplication, and then we're most likely, because we're starting with mixed fractions, we're most likely going to end with an improper answer and have to flip it back into a mixed. So that's the game plan. So here's how we're going to do this. Remember, 2 times 2 is 4. 4 plus 1 is 5. So 5/2. And all I'm going to do is bring the sign down. 4 times 1 is 4. 4 plus 1 is 5. And our denominator stays the same. And now we're going to do our regular multiplication. So 5 times 5 is 25. 2 times 4 is 8. I'm just going to move this fraction down here because I'm running out of room. So the next, we cannot leave it this way. Remember that example I used with the Legos? If you put too many Legos up at the top, it's going to fall and be top heavy. This is our improper fraction. It's wrong. It's improper because our top number is bigger than our bottom number. So let's switch it to a mixed. How many times does 8 go into 25? 3 is the right answer. Because 8 times 3 is 24. So we're going to drag our denominator over. So 8 times 3 is 24. Minus 25, how many we have left over is our numerator, which is 3 1/8. So now if you look at the original problem, if we had done this separately, right, you would have ended up 2 times 1 is 2. So how did we end up with 3? Instead of ending up with 2. Did we do our math right? We did do our math right. But this is one of those instances where you would have had to borrow and it could have potentially gone wrong. So that's how to work this to make sure that you end up back in the proper things. But let's check our math again anyway. 2 times 2 is 4. 4 plus 1 is 5. 4 times 1 is 4, plus 1 is 5, over 4. 5 times 5 is 25. 2 times 4 is 8. Sometimes when you're doing math quick, it might be 6 because you accidentally add. That's okay. And then 25 divided by 8 is 3. We have 1 left over, and that's our answer. Okay, so that's multiplying. Let's switch gears and go into dividing fractions. Again, the only thing that's different is that very first, sorry, I have marker all over my hands because I'm using tissues as an eraser. The only thing that's going to be different is that initial step where we're going to flip that fraction. Some people just see the division sign and get nervous, and you don't need to at all. So, our first step is to flip the second fraction, which is always going to be the one on the right. When we make that flip, notice I'm not going to write anything in the middle. So that means the bottom is going to become the top, and the top is going to become the bottom. When we make that flip, the sign is going to change to multiplication. And now it's a multiplication problem again. So 3 times 4 is 12. 4 times 1 is 4. This is an improper fraction, so we need to change it to a mixed fraction. But in this case, 4 goes into 12 evenly, so our answer is 3, just as a whole number. Okay? I really, really hope you're sitting there going, that's it? Because, yeah, that's it. It's not as scary as it sounds or as the initial problem looks. Sometimes you might also see the problem, and I hate when people do this, but you might also see the problem like this, because this is a sign for divide. You may also see the problem written as 3/4 over 1/4. Those are different ways to write the same exact thing that we did. So if you ever see the problem written in either of these two ways, just change it and rewrite the problem to where you're comfortable. But different worksheets, different textbooks, things like that, they set things up differently on you. But it all means the same thing. Okay, so let's try another one. And then we'll get to a mixed. All right, so 2/8 divided by 2/8. I'm sorry, my little dots are not coming through dark enough for you. So, first step, we're going to flip that second fraction. So 2/8 and 8/2 is how you read that. Not 8 seconds, it's 8/2. And then our sign is going to change to multiply. So we're going to end up with 16 over 16. So remember, we talked about any number over itself is always going to be the number 1. So the number 1 is going to be your answer. And I just wanted to do this one quicker. So now let's move into the mixed fractions. I just want to show you all the different ways that this can be done. So this way, if you get a problem and it's 8 over 8 or something like that, you're not confused and you don't leave it as 8 over 8. Any number over any number is always going to be the number 1. Two and 1/4. I'm trying to make my dots and my markers darker for you. I don't think it's working very well. 2 1/4 divided by 2 and 3/8. Sorry, I'm making these numbers up as I go. Alright, so our first step, just like with multiplication, is to flip this into 2 improper fractions. So 4 times 2 is 8, plus 1 is 9/4. We're going to leave the divide sign. Eventually, you're going to get so good that you're going to be able to turn this improper and flip it all in one move in your head. But at this stage of the game, don't worry about it. Let's take it in steps. It doesn't matter how many steps it takes for you to get there. It just matters that you get there. So take your time. Don't rush. So 8 times 2 is 16, and then 16 plus 3 is 19. 19 over 8. And is anybody getting worried because we have a really big number? Oh my gosh. Where's the calculator? Don't worry, I got one on my phone for you. And now look, using a calculator is not a bad thing at all. I have to find the calculator because I didn't bring one up here. Hang on, I'm going to pause you for a minute. Sorry, my calculator was in a different room, and I didn't want to leave you with dead air. So, before we work the rest of the problem, let's talk calculators. Some people don't believe in them. I know you guys are still really young, and you're very digital, so everything is probably done by calculator. But for the parents or the teachers who are there and who are watching, you might be under the impression that a calculator is not a good thing to use. I'm in the middle on this. You don't want to rely on a calculator. So if this is a 4th grade class, so really honing those multiplication skills is going to be fantastic. But then we get to something where 19 is not part of our typical multiplication tables. We stop at 10. So using a calculator when we get to something bigger than like this is okay to do. It's not a representation of being stupid or of being weak, which some people get scared of. It's actually smart because you're checking your work. But you don't also want to completely rely on calculators and technology. So you 4th graders one day might be working at CVS when you're 16, or you might be working at a pharmacy or a grocery store, and if the register doesn't tell you the correct change, you won't be able to do the math in your head because you've relied on one of these things for so long. That's what we want to avoid. But sometimes we need them. So let's finish working this problem. Okay, so we have right now, all we did was change our mixed to our impropers. So we still didn't flip anything yet. So now is going to be the step where we flip, and our sign is going to change. And our numbers are going to be big, and that's okay. Big numbers are not anything to freak out about. It's okay. So 8 times 9. Now that one we can do in our head, right? 72. If you're not sure, take a minute. Do 9 times 8 in your calculator, because sometimes the 9 times tables give people some trouble. But 14 times 9. Can I do that in my head? Yes, absolutely I can. Can you do that in your head? I don't know. If you can, you are so awesome. If you can't, you're still awesome. Just grab a calculator. It's fine. So, 19 times 4 is 76. So, we ended up lucky with the fact that because we flipped this fraction, we do not have an improper fraction. We have a regular fraction. But now this also means that we need to divide this. We need to reduce this. But these are big numbers, so how do we do this? Well, let's get it a little bit more manageable. So let's look at our calculator, and can we divide the top number and the bottom number by 2? The answer is yes. I'm just going to write it down here. So when we divide 72 by 2, we get 36. When we divide 76 divided by 2, we get 38. Now can we divide that by 2 again? Well, let's see. On the bottom, I know I can divide it again. And on the top, I know I can divide it again. So on the bottom, 38 divided by 2 is 19. 36 divided by 2, I'll use the calculator. You can do this in your head, maybe. It is 18. So, we got this far. We probably know by looking that 18 can get smaller. It absolutely can. But can 19 get any smaller? Nope. The only numbers that are going to go into 19 are going to be 1 and 19. So we can't reduce this any further. And even though it looks like the numbers are still big, and it looks like a funky fraction, that's going to be your answer. And that's what you do when you have to go from a mixed and work the division problem. Because look, if we didn't do this, we would have ended up with like 4, and how do you even divide the whole numbers? Because a lot of the times, people would have just flipped the 3/8 into the 8/3, and then the whole numbers would have gotten lost, and you would have ended up, if you tried to separate the whole numbers from the fractions, you would have ended up with a mixed fraction, and that's a completely different answer than what we ended up with. Okay, so for multiplication and division, like I said, usually this is kind of people's favorite thing to do with fractions because it's not as scary, not as difficult. You can see how black my hands are. So I'm going to stop this video so that I can go wash my hands. And then the next time you see me, we're going to be walking through the problems of how to work through these. The problems that I have posted for all of them are going to be, there's going to be a lot of problems there. And we're going to pick a couple of them that might be more difficult and work through them rather than work through every single problem. So this way the video isn't too long. So I hope you learned something. You did a good job. Thanks for letting me run and get my calculator. And I'll see you next time. Bye.